What's up, everybody? Black and Gold Breakdown May 9th on a Thursday. I know I usually start these at like 7:30. That's like the built-in plan. If I'm being perfectly honest, I just binge watched like 6 episodes of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix. And then I looked down, I was like, oh wow, I knew there was something I should have been doing. So then made this real quick. So we do have stuff to talk about today with the Steelers. Najee Harris continued drama, Bud Dupree stuff, and then the ongoing search for another receiver that isn't going to be fifth on the depth chart is what kind of ran through the docket today. Start with the Najee Harris stuff. So Paul Zeese was on 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh and said that someone or a source had told him that Najee Harris had asked the Steelers to decline his fifth-year option. You know, last week Pittsburgh declined the option. There was a bunch of like uproar from fans. You know, Harris has been productive in his first 3 years. Has 3 1,000-yard seasons under his belt. It was a good running back. And Pittsburgh declined the fifth-year option. And then Paul Zeese from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette went on 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh today and said that a source told him that Najee Harris asked him or asked the Steelers to decline the fifth-year option. And then shortly after, Najee Harris's agent says, yeah, that didn't happen. So a lot of continued drama with this story, regardless of what's true or not. It does appear that 2024 will be Najee Harris's final year in Pittsburgh, barring anything catastrophic that happens, whether that be, he re-signs and returns or he is traded before then. I don't think that they would trade him. That wouldn't make sense, especially for what the offense wants to do. If he requests a trade, I'm sure that they would trade him, but until that happens, I wouldn't expect them to trade Najee Harris. Because again, let's say that they would move him as part of a package for a wide receiver. Well, that's cool. You got the receiver, but now you have a need at running back opposite of Jaylen Warren. So, it's cutting off your nose to spite your face at that point. You gotta. I don't think that they'll move him. I think that he'll play this year. I think he'll have a nice year. He'll sign elsewhere in free agency. The Steelers would get a different running back to complement Jaylen Warren ahead of 2025, whether that be somebody that's already on the roster. If Daijun Edwards ends up panning out, the undrafted rookie free agent out of Georgia who had 13 rushing touchdowns last year, and they feel confident enough to give him a chance to be the second running back behind Jaylen Warren next year, okay. Or if they, go the likes of the draft in the mid rounds. They haven't had a lot of success doing that recently with, Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland in recent years. Or they could sign someone in free agency. So a few different routes they could go down. We'll see what ends up happening here. But again, the story continues to have a few different elements to it where, Paul Zeese, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, is saying that a source told him that Najee Harris asked the Steelers to not pick up his option. And then Najee Harris's agent comes out and refutes that statement. So regardless, it's a story that will be followed for the next year very closely. Taking a coffee break. And Najee Harris, like I said, good running back. I think he'll have a nice year in the Arthur Smith system as, the between the tackles type runner. Have a lot more outside zone featured in the offense, so he'll be able to take advantage of those types of runs. They're going to run some gap scheme stuff as well. Like, I think Najee Harris is going to have a nice year and then sign elsewhere next offseason. Because the Steelers Jaylen Warren's going to be a restricted free agent next year. They're not going to pay both of them. And so I think that they're going to bring back Jalen Warren for less money, and a guy who you could argue is the better running back. I make the argument that he is the better running back. So Najee Harris will finish out this year in Pittsburgh, sign elsewhere next year. In terms of Paul Z's claiming that he asked Pittsburgh to decline his fifth-year option, and again, obviously the agent refutes that, and that's fine. I'll say this: the agent wasn't going to come out and say, "Yep, he did it," but he could have also just stayed silent too. So if he was that adamant on, making it known that Najee Harris didn't ask Pittsburgh to do that, I get that. So we'll see where it goes. I'm intrigued to see where this story goes. What happens with Najee Harris? But if I had to guess, it'll be his final year in Pittsburgh. Again, could they come to terms where they agree on an extension? Sure, it would surprise me. But stranger things have happened. Much stranger things have happened. X Concepts. Najee's going to ball out and sign a 3-year extension. I don't think it'll be a 3-year extension if they do. I think it'll be a 2-year extension if they do come to terms. But again, I wouldn't blame him necessarily if he wanted to go somewhere else to be the unquestioned number one rather than, not even split carries, because he still gets the majority of the carries, but still share a backfield, even if it's, a 60-40 situation. But yeah, like I said, I think he'll sign elsewhere next offseason. Pittsburgh will roll with Jalen Warren as the 1, and then whoever they bring in as the 2. But yeah, this is, a bigger news story for the day, if you want to call it that. It was more, rumor than anything, and it was shot down by Najee Harris's agent somewhat quickly. But we'll see what happens over the course of the next calendar year. And again, as soon as I saw it, I was like, well, could they trade him? Maybe, but that wouldn't make too much sense, because then they would be just creating a hole at another spot on the offense, and a hole that right now will be a little bit more difficult to fill because there's not really anybody available on the free agent market in terms of running backs. The best name that you could probably find there is Kareem Hunt, maybe Matt Breida. But no, I think that Najee Harris is going to be in Pittsburgh this year, finish out 2024 as a Steeler, and then test the free agent market. And if a team blows him away with a deal, then good for him. Get that money. I'm all for players getting their money. And I think that some team will give him a contract in next offseason. And good for him. Good for him. So we'll see. Splitting carry. Oop. Knocked you away. Splitting carries makes his 3-year run of 1,000 yards more impressive, I think. Well, he wasn't splitting carries the first year. I think he had like 1,200 yards that first year. Even in 2022, wasn't really splitting. Last year was when they first really started featuring Jalen Warren more. Jalen Warren, had somewhat of a role in 22, but he wasn't getting the amount of carries in 22 that he was in 23. Last year was like the first year that they were really, a quote unquote split backfield. But again, I've said my case about why it's not a big deal if Najee Harris doesn't come back. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but 64 yards a game wouldn't be production that's too difficult to replace. We're going to see what he looks like this year. New offensive line, new offense. Excuse me. So we're going to see what that ends up looking like. I'm excited for the offense. I'm excited for the run game. I hope that Najee Harris balls out, and I hope that a team gives him a lot of money for doing it. But in other news, the Steelers might be bringing back a familiar face. It was reported today that the Chargers had a visit with Bud Dupree. And it was also reported in that tweet by Adam Schefter that he is also in talks with the Steelers and the Atlanta Falcons, 2 of his former teams, about, just trying to figure out where he's going to go. The Steelers are one of those teams that have been in contact with Bud Dupree. Spent the first 6 years of his career in Pittsburgh from 15 to 20, 39 and a half sacks in those years. Went to Tennessee, had some injury-riddled seasons there, was only there for 2 years. and then spent last year in Atlanta where he had 6.5 sacks, 53 career sacks since entering the league in 2015. And right now, if you look at the Steelers' edge depth, they don't really have any. It's TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith as the starters. They have Nick Herbig to back them up and come in, and rotate in. That's it. It's those three. I think that signing Bud to a 1-year cheap vet deal makes a lot of sense to have as just to basically be what Marcus Golden was last year. Have him rotate in, fill a role, have a select number of snaps per game. I think it makes all the sense in the world to bring Bud Dupree back in that role. If it's a cheap 1-year veteran deal, absolutely. It makes perfect sense to have him as a depth guy. And again, just basically be what Marcus Golden was last year. I think that makes perfect sense. Nick Herbig is going to be the preliminary guy that comes in. He's going to have a bigger role this year, I would assume. So I'm excited to see if that does come to fruition. I'm a big Bud Dupree fan. I loved Bud Dupree when he was in Pittsburgh. It was sad to see him go, but everybody kind of knew he was going to go during that offseason where they lost Mike Hilton. They lost Bud Dupree. They lost a bunch of guys that offseason. They released Steven Nelson. So a lot of guys went that offseason. Bud Dupree was one of them. So I would very much welcome him returning to Pittsburgh. Him and TJ Watt are buddies, so that would be nice. Nice to see Bud Dupree come back. And again, from 2015 to 2020, had 39.5 sacks, had 11.5 sacks in 2019, which was his career high. So I'm excited to see what the possibilities could hold if Bud Dupree comes back. And, a pass rushing rotation of TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith getting the majority of the snaps, with Nick Herbig and Bud Dupree stepping in as rotational pieces with X amount of snaps per game, or stepping in if one of these guys gets hurt. You could certainly do worse with your top 4 edge rushers for sure. So I very much welcome a Bud Dupree return to Pittsburgh. That would be awesome. So consider me very much in on that. That's something that I would absolutely love to see. It's an avenue that I would love to see the Steelers go down. So hopefully that's something that does happen, because I'm a big Bud Dupree guy, and I think that would make sense. More questions or comments, I guess, on the Najee Harris stuff. Harris questioned the Steelers' culture and work ethic. Not surprised. He wasn't shy about saying how he felt. I think after the Cleveland game last year, he was pretty vocal to the media about just like being tired of the nonsense. So I admire him for that, very much so. Like, if he's got something on his mind, he's got no problem saying it, and I completely respect that. So definitely, you're not going to hear me say a bad word about. I'm not going to say a bad word about Najee, regardless. I have my opinions on him as like how good of a football player he is, but in terms of like how he carries himself, I love the way he carries himself. I think he was questioning Kenny and his desire to win and work, not the team as a whole, but was respectful about it regardless. Yeah, like he's always careful with his wording, and I like Najee, and I hope that he balls out this year. I hope he gets a big money deal next offseason with whoever is going to give him that big money deal. I like Golden. Do you see Bud as an upgrade at this point? He's had injury issues. I think worst case scenario, it's a lateral move where, they're basically the same. Let me look and see what Marcus Golden's numbers were last year compared to Bud's, just to give you a clear number in that case. So last year, Marcus Golden had, of course, it's not just going to give me a pop-up, because why would it? Marcus Golden last year had 4 sacks. Bud Dupree had 6.5. I'd have to pull up like the pressure rates and stuff to know like exactly how impactful each guy was. But I think worst case scenario, it's a lateral move where Bud is basically what Marcus Golden was. I think best case scenario, he's a little bit better than what Marcus Golden was. Nick Herbig's still going to be the preliminary guy that rotates in, and I think he's going to have a little bit bigger of a role than what he did last year. But I'm totally cool with having Bud Dupree there as like the 4th guy. I'm definitely in on that. What else? The continued, wide receiver, who's going to be the next acquisition. They signed Scotty Miller yesterday. but still don't have a number 2 or number 1, if depending on how you feel about Pickens on the roster. And I think at this point, there is a way where even if the guy that they eventually do bring in, because I do think they're going to bring in somebody regardless, even if it's underwhelming to what people expect, that you can make do with the guys that you're going to have. I wrote about it today because look at what the Lions do offensively. Amon-Ra St. Brown was 5th in the NFL in targets last year, operated predominantly from the slot. They didn't have a upper echelon outside threat last year. Josh Reynolds was their outside threat. It's not as if Josh Reynolds is a top 30 receiver in football. Jamison Williams was their other boundary guy. He only had 40 targets last year. So they would need to lean on Roman Wilson a little bit more. They would have to move, him and Pickens around. Which, by the way, at the end of last year, they started moving Pickens around more. They put him in the slot a little bit more. So you can have situations where whoever they bring in, let's say it's a Darius Slayton, is on the outside and they move Pickens into the slot, or at least closer to the line of scrimmage to try to take advantage of his size on certain plays. You can have Roman Wilson run those intermediate crossers from the slot. So I think that if the Steelers kind of take a play out of the Lions' book here, utilize your receivers in the slot a lot, there's a recipe where this could work. Because last year, David Montgomery ran for over 1,000 yards. Jahmyr Gibbs was 55 or 65 yards away from running for 1,000 yards, but Jared Goff still threw for 4,600 yards. Like, they were the definition of balance, and they were one of the most prolific offenses in the NFL without a legitimate top tier perimeter receiver. It was Amon-Ra operating from the slot, and it was running the ball, and it was taking advantage of Sam Laporta at tight end. Guess who's going to have to be Sam Laporta in this offense? Pat Freiermuth. Now, he's not nearly as good a blocker as Sam Laporta is, but you got Darnell Washington and Michael Pruitt to do that stuff. So you can take advantage of Pat Freiermuth as a receiver. So there is a way where even if the next receiver that they get isn't a big name, if it's not going to be a DK Metcalf, if it's not going to be Courtland Sutton, it's probably not going to be either of the 49ers guys. If it's not going to be anybody like that and it ends up being Treylon Burks, if it ends up being Darius Slayton, if it ends up being John Mechie, there's a way that it can still work and that they can still make do. They're going to have to, if you take advantage of your guys in the slot, I would love to see George Pickens get more looks from the slot, but that wouldn't compromise what he does on the outside because they're still obviously going to use him in that capacity with Russell Wilson throwing him a few moon balls per game. So they're going to really need to, in that case, they'd lean a little bit more on Roman Wilson. They're going to need George Pickens to become a better intermediate separator rather than just being, okay, he's going to catch it for, 3 yards out and run for the rest, or he's just going to catch a moonshot. He's got to develop that intermediate portion of his game a little bit more. And like I said, they're going to lean on Roman Wilson. And if you bring in a guy like Treylon Burks, if you bring in a guy like John Mechie, you're banking on upside. So there's a way that it can work. The Lions proved that last year. Now, George Pickens and Roman Wilson aren't Amon-Ra St. Brown, but Pickens is good, and you drafted Roman Wilson with the expectation that he's going to contribute. And if you get somebody, like a Burks or a Mechie, or if Darius Slayton ends up being the guy, that's fine with me. Again, would I rather have a Courtland Sutton or a DK Metcalf? Sure. But if you can't get any of those guys, then, you could do worse than Darius Slayton. So it can work. It's just a matter of the Steelers moving around the pieces that they have and constantly being able to keep defenses on their toes and change up their own looks. Put Pickens in the slot sometimes. He's very good when you give him the ball on these, these quick drags, these slants. And again, he has to develop more of an intermediate separation, intermediate route tree. because that's really the part of his game that's still not quite where you'd like it to be. He's great after the catch on short receptions, and obviously he's great downfield. It's the intermediate stuff that's preventing him from being, talked about as one of the better, legitimate number one receivers in the game. But even if they don't land, a big name receiver or one of the receivers that they've been rumored to be connected to, whether it's Courtland Sutton, DK Metcalf, or what have you, they can still make this work. I saw some. All right, we'll go back up to the top. Dating back to the Bud Dupree question. Do you think that Leal will be a depth edge guy? I don't think DeMarvin Leal is making the roster. I think that they'll either try to move him or they'll just cut him. I don't think he makes the roster. I think Logan Lee pushes him off. Your doppelganger, Pat Freiermuth, is wide receiver too. Pat's going to get his looks. He's going to get his looks. I think that Freiermuth will be no lower than third on the team in targets next year. I think the highest he'll be is second, because I still think Pickens is going to get the majority of the targets. But I think Freiermuth will be second or third. I think he's going to have a nice year. Could definitely see like a 65, 70 catch season for Freiermuth. And look, he had 65 catches in 2022, but they were, the majority of those were 6 yards tackled. He was just a safety blanket guy. I think that if they utilize him more as a vertical threat tight end, he'll put up really nice numbers. Wrote that as my open statement, not knocking Harris. My point is that not many front offices want team issues, truth or not, put out there to the public. Yeah, sure, I get that. No, like I said, wherever Najee is next year, he'll have my best wishes. I hope he kills it this year and gets a lot of money. Time will tell, but I think he'll do well in this offense. What do you think about Muth as a tight end or receiver? I think he's going to be basically a slot receiver. Said that all off season, where if you look at how Arthur Smith utilized Kyle Pitts, he was basically a slot receiver. He utilized other guys to block. That's why Michael Pruitt, who is now a Steeler, was basically their blocking guy. So I think that Muth is going to be basically just a power slot receiver who operates a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. That's how they're going to use him more often than not, I would guess. And that's fine. Now, if you saw the show yesterday, you saw Nick Farbaugh and I talk about what they were going to do in terms of receivers and tight ends. Because they got a lot of receivers, and it's very real that they only keep 5 of them and they roll with 4 tight ends. And if that's the case, again, whoever they bring in at receiver, they're not done bringing in receivers. They're going to bring in somebody to be that other boundary guy. The signings of Miller and Quez Watkins, I think, were more or less to push Calvin Austin in camp to be like, okay, hey, we brought in these 2 dudes. Show us you're better than them. And if you do that, then we'll have more confidence in you. But like Farbaugh and I talked about yesterday, it's not a guarantee Calvin Austin makes the roster, especially if Scotty Miller shows out in camp or if Quez Watkins surprises some people and shows out in camp and looks better than them. So if they do, let's say they bring in Darius Slayton, then the locks to make the roster for at receiver are Pickens, Slayton, Roman Wilson. It's kind of a toss-up after that. I think Van Jefferson would be there purely because the run blocking stuff and he knows the offense. And then it's okay. It becomes a competition between Calvin Austin, Scotty Miller, Quez Watkins, Marquez Callaway, Denzel Mims. Those are 5 legitimate guys that could take that 5 spot. I think 5 guys that could legitimately make the roster. And I don't think they're going to keep 6. I think that they'll keep 5 similar to what they did in 2020 and have Freiermuth be the de facto 6th receiver. Still has a tight end on the depth chart because he's still going to have his hand in the dirt at times, but he's going to operate as a slot receiver more. And I think they're just going to basically have him be the de facto 6th receiver on the depth chart when really he's going to be the 2nd or 3rd target in the offense. So they're going to keep Freiermuth. They're going to keep Darnell Washington. My guess is they're going to keep Michael Pruitt. Unless, Rodney Williams, who was a tight end in camp last year, shows them something. But I think that they'll keep him. And then Hayward will be there as well. So I've told you guys this for a while. good. There's a realistic chance that Calvin Austin just doesn't show him enough. And Scotty Miller has a nice camp, or Quez Watkins does. I don't think it'll be Quez Watkins because I don't think Quez Watkins is very good. But there's a chance here. But that competition for the 4th and 5th spots, I like. If I had to guess right now, Van Jefferson might have a roster spot. Like Van Jefferson and Scotty Miller go in like knowing the offense, so they have a little bit of a built-in advantage where they're basically like glorified assistant coaches. But Marquez Callaway. Like, let me pull up Marquez Callaway's stats from a few years ago in New Orleans because if you're like a big fantasy football player, I remember Marquez Callaway was a name that everybody was talking about in like 2022. 2021, my apologies. So 2021, 46 catches, 698 yards, 6 touchdowns. 2022, I only had 16 catches, didn't play last year. So they're bringing in a bunch of these cast-off guys that have had years. Like Scotty Miller had a nice year. Marquez Callaway had a nice year. Denzel Mims was a second-round pick, so they brought him in basically for upside. Quez Watkins has, proven to be at least somewhat reliable with Philadelphia, but has, a lot of questions. Van Jefferson, the year that the Rams won the Super Bowl, was a valuable contributor. So they're bringing in these guys who have all had nice years like 2 or 3 years ago and hoping that one of these darts sticks to the board. But again, there's a chance that the fish they do land isn't going to be a big fish. If you missed the show yesterday, Faraba and I talked about it. Like, I think that their plan was probably Mike Williams, and then he signed with the Jets, and they were like, crap. Well, let's hope that we can trade for somebody, and then there wasn't a market. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be. Again, continue keeping an eye on the Courtland Sutton situation. I'm going to continue, like, once we get closer to the Broncos mandatory mini camp, I'm going to reach out and see what the situation with Courtland Sutton is to see if there's been any progress made. And that's a situation where if nothing gets done on either side, then maybe they finally decide to trade him. And if that's the case, then Pittsburgh would be, a team that I would assume will be in on him. So it's not to say that they won't make a move for a name that they've been connected to, but it doesn't seem like the trade market's been there yet. And right now it doesn't seem, like it's like a move will be made until at least June, where, especially for like a DK Metcalf, where if you do the trade post June 1, you can spread the cap hit, the dead cap hit over multiple years rather than eat it all this year. I know a few people have asked about a post June 1 trade, why that matters. That's why it matters, because if you do a trade before June 1st, then you have to eat all of that cap in 1 year. If you do it after June 1st, you can spread it out. So that's why a lot of moves, once you get into June, you see guys, oh, he got cut. Oh, he got traded. Oh, okay. So that's why that tends to be the case. Let me get up here. The games the past few years that have been so close in scoring that TJ snap count was way higher than any other, thus causing him so many injuries. He needs a real rotation to save some for playoffs. Yeah, and look, a rotation of last year they had a nice rotation. Urbig was really good as a rookie. Marcus Golden filled the role nicely. I thought that was a fine rotation to have of those 4. So having Urbig back again, I think he's only going to continue getting better, and I think bringing in Bud Dupree on like a 1-year vet minimum deal makes sense. Watkins can't catch a goal. Yeah, his hands have been, the biggest detractor when it comes to Quez Watkins. Unless things have changed, I read Smith as tight end passing heavy with one wide receiver. The other wide receivers have supporting roles who can block. Wilson is a great blocker. Austin isn't. In terms of Arthur Smith's offense, I think a lot of the fact that, if you look at their targets last year, Drake London, the receiver, led them in targets. Drake London's a good receiver. Kyle Pitts was number 2, and then the next wide receiver on the list of targets was Mac Hollins. I think a lot of why Smith didn't target receivers last year because he didn't have any good ones outside of Drake London. He had Mac Hollins, Zacchaeus, Van Jefferson. Like, he didn't really have a legitimate receiver outside of Drake London. And so, now, again, I do think that Pat Freiermuth is going to be basically what Kyle Pitts was last year and get a lot of targets, but the receiving room that the Steelers have this year is better than the Falcons was last year. And we're talking about the Steelers wide receiver room right now like it's doom and gloom. Pickens and Roman Wilson, that duo is better than any combination of Falcons receivers last year. Plus, you throw in Pat Freiermuth and Jaylen Warren out of the backfield. Like, they can, like I said, they can make do with what they have, especially after they bring in somebody to be the number 2, whether that's Darius Slayton, who I think will be a possibility, especially after the Giants just signed Allen Robinson. So with Darius Slayton on the roster, they just drafted Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson coming back from injury. So they could be open for business when it comes to moving Darius Slayton. And I think that's one to keep an eye on. And if it's not Slayton, if we get into like July, like right before camp and nothing's been done, and they call up Tennessee and be like, we'll give you a 7th for Treylon Burks, what do you say? They would probably do the deal because it's very evident they just want to get rid of Treylon Burks because they're not going to use him. So trade one of the 7s you got from Philadelphia for Kenny Pickett and hope that the upside of Treylon Burks is still there and comes out and is able to, make itself known. Deontay Johnson was hurt. Wouldn't they have played Callaway if they liked him? I mean, he's on the practice squad. He wasn't even. The Steelers signed him ahead of this season. He was on the Saints practice squad last year. He wasn't with the Steelers last year. So we'll see. We'll see. I think that Marquez Callaway has. I mean, that one year that he was good in 2021, it was a lot of moonshots from Jameis that year. So he's a good deep threat. At least he was in 2021. Again, that's 3 years ago. And they've brought in a bunch of guys who had nice years 2 or 3 years ago. So they're hoping that one of these darts sticks. Wide receivers are willing to be in team support and not complaining about individual stats. Wide receivers are willing to be in. I mean, receivers want their numbers. They want their target. They want to be part of the offense. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Now, when it becomes detrimental to the team because you're freaking out about how much targets you're getting, sure, that's bad. But there's a fine line between, wanting to contribute and making it known and being a pain in the butt. That's the fine line between, the Terrell Owens and Odell Beckhams of the world, where you got to find a nice way to hover that line. But again, there's a real possibility that they don't end up getting one of these receivers that we'd all like them to get. But they can make do if it's John Mechie, if it's Treylon Burks, if it's Darius Slayton. If it's Darius Slayton, I won't be too mad, That was Des Fitzpatrick. Yeah, Des Fitzpatrick's been there. He was there last training camp, and he'll be back this year. So he was on the practice squad last year. Came out of Louisville in 2021. Tall frame, nice red zone threat in college, but nothing crazy from Des Fitzpatrick. We'll see. I mean, look, they've got 11 receivers that'll be at camp. There's going to be a lot of them. They're all going to be fighting to be the 5th guy. And if they do keep a 6th, then cool. It would surprise me a little bit. I'm going to have to do, ahead of training camp, we'll do like a 53-man roster projection. And we'll see how many would stay on offense and how many they keep on defense. So is there a world where they can keep 6 and 4? Sure. But we'll see. Maybe they do keep 6 and 4. But if I'm guessing right now, it would be 5 and 4. But, if they felt like, okay, we'll keep an extra receiver and then, chop out somebody else at a different spot. Maybe they keep one less safety, or maybe they keep one less, I don't know. But sure, it is possible that they keep 6 and 4 in terms of receivers and tight ends. But yeah. And if, try to wrap this up here in the next 5 minutes or so. But if you have any other questions, absolutely feel free to drop them. If you have any comments that you'd like to bring to attention, go ahead and do that. And I said, we'll try to get out of here in the next 5 minutes or so. Nice 40-minute show today. But again, just to recap everything from today, Najee Harris reported that he asked Pittsburgh to decline his fifth-year option. By Paul Zeese of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, he said that on 93.7 The Fan. Najee Harris's agent quickly refuted that on Twitter. So just keep an eye on that situation going forward. I don't think they're going to move him. I think he'll be in Pittsburgh throughout 2024 and then get paid next offseason, probably by a different team. Bud Dupree, Steelers have been in talks with him about a potential reunion. He wrapped up a visit with the Chargers today. He's also been in talks with Pittsburgh and Atlanta. It would make sense to bring him in on a 1-year vet minimum deal to have him as the fourth edge guy behind TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and Nick Herbig, if you ask me. I think it's a risk-free type thing where you're not going to pay him a ton. Had 6.5 sacks last year with Atlanta. If he could replicate that, that's great. Great production from your fourth edge guy. I think that would be fine. So I'm all for a Bud Dupree reunion in Pittsburgh. I think that would be good. And then we keep talking about these receivers. Who's it going to be? Eventually, one of them's gonna get moved. So we'll see. But there's a real chance where it ends up being somebody like a John Mechie or Traylon Burks rather than a Cortland Sutton or, DK Metcalf's been a name that's been thrown around. But I think the most realistic of the bigger names is Cortland Sutton to this point. And I think that's the one to keep the closest eye on. I said about Brandon Cooks, but what about Jameson Williams? I doubt they trade him. The gambling suspension doesn't mean anything, honestly. Like, it's not anything to worry about in the past. And with Jameson Williams, he's fast, but hasn't proven to be anything more than just a fast gadget guy. He only had 40 targets last year. All of his biggest plays came on, like in the NFC Championship game, he scored a touchdown, but it was on like a reverse type play. So I don't think that Jameson Williams necessarily makes a ton of sense, and I don't think Detroit's looking to move him. How do you feel about this offseason? I think getting a wide receiver and a slot corner to complete the dream. Yeah, I mean, that's their two biggest needs still is a number 2 or number 1B, however you want to phrase it, another receiver. And then the Cam Sutton stuff, I mean, it looks like that is probably going to happen where they bring back Cam Sutton. And if that's what they decide to do, okay, then that fills a hole at slot corner. I still think that there would be a nice chance that Beanie Bishop would make the roster. And then it comes down to what happens with Corey Trice and Darius Rush. So that'll be something to pay attention to in camp. Should they bring back Cam Sutton, that battle for the depth cornerback spots between Bishop, Corey Trice, and Darius Rush for sure. I was trying to think. Peyton Wilson was to address Holcomb's injury. Well, I mean, also Peyton Wilson just fell to them. I don't think that they expected him to. So that was a nice pickup, but Peyton Wilson's better than Cole Holcomb. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone. Yeah, it fills, a need at adding to the linebacker room, but he's also better than Cole Holcomb. So I think that Peyton Wilson will be starting before the end of the year, if not like pretty close to the beginning of it. He's just that talented. And like my nice little bold prediction, he'll be wearing the green dot in 2025. So I'm excited. Very excited for Peyton Wilson. He's great. Quarterback uncertainty has to be addressed before big post-game dreams. We're going to find out how good they are. Like I've said all offseason, tell me how good the quarterbacks are. I'll tell you how far the Steelers go. Because if the quarterbacks aren't good, then they're not going to go anywhere. And frankly speaking, if the quarterback's not good, then everything else you do on the roster doesn't mean anything. Just being frank. You can have the best roster in the world, but if the quarterback stinks, who cares? Now, ask the Jets. They've had one of the best defenses in the NFL over the past 2 years and couldn't win more than 7 games or however many they won because the quarterback stunk. So, doesn't matter. If the quarterbacks are good, then they'll go far. If the quarterback's not good, that'll be the same old story that it's been for the past few years. And then it'll become, okay, Maybe the Steelers will play the Dak Prescott game. Maybe they'll be in on that. But we'll save those type of conversations for next offseason after the season's complete and we, have any sort of reason to think that that would be the case. Peyton Wilson was we have to take him. The value is just way too good at 98 type pick. And look, he's going to be a starter. I don't know if it's going to be right away, but he's going to play right away for sure. Like he's going to be a nice contributor right away, and I think he'll be a starter before we know it. Hopefully Cole Holcomb can make a full comeback. I agree. I hope Cole Holcomb's okay. Ravens find that out every postseason Jackson plays. Look, Lamar is a very good regular season quarterback in my mind, but Lamar Jackson's a guy that you can beat, younger quarterbacks who, like CJ Stroud, I think is terrific and was an MVP candidate last year. But the Texans also didn't have Tank Dell, and they didn't have anybody who could separate like naturally as route runners. And the Ravens defense feasted on that. Like look at the game that Lamar played. He was fine. And then when he played the Chiefs or when he played the Bills like they did a few years ago, Lamar Jackson has a playoff game against the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen and a playoff game against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. The Ravens have scored 13 points combined in those two games. The Ravens don't scare me as a Super Bowl threat. I think they're a very good regular season team, but they don't scare me as a Super Bowl threat. I think they're better than that tier of the Titans were consistently in the playoffs. I think they're better than what those teams were, but they're not the Bills, the Chiefs, the Bengals. They're not that tier. Steelers need Fields to be a pocket passer, not a runner. They need him to be both. They're definitely going to take advantage of it. Like if you got a guy that can do that with his legs, you take advantage of it for sure. Ask the Bills. Josh Allen, like one of the things that makes Josh Allen so good is that, yeah, he can throw it 80 yards and he's got a cannon, but also he'll run for 70 yards and he'll run through you. He's the only quarterback in NFL history with 4 consecutive years of 40-plus touchdowns. Like if you got a guy that can run, yeah, take advantage of it, but that can't be the only thing that he does. So, yeah, they need him to be more of a pocket passer, but they shouldn't ask him to not run because the Bills tried to do that with Josh Allen. Like after Brian Daboll left, Ken Dorsey took over and it looked like, hey, they were trying to make Josh Allen not Josh Allen. They were trying to make him not run. And then Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator. They're like, no, Josh, run. Like, if nothing's there, fucking run, dude. Like, you're able to do it. Fucking run. So, I agree that Fields needs to be better as a pocket passer, but that they shouldn't ask him to not do what very few quarterbacks can do, and that's run like him. Stop hating on Lamar Jackson. What has Josh Allen done? Well, he's beaten Lamar Jackson in the playoffs. He's got 3 more playoff wins than Lamar Jackson has. That's just to name 2. So there's that. Jackson can't read post-snap defensive rushes. His processing is subpar, and defensive coordinators know it. I mean, I'm not going to turn this into like a ginormous football jargon show, but I do my quarterback rankings every year for USA Today. I did my top 36 last week, and I have Lamar at 7. So I think he's good. I'm not one of these people who's going to be like, oh, Lamar Jackson's a running back. No, that's stupid to say. Like, he's a good quarterback, but he's not better than Mahomes. He's not better than Allen. He's not better than Burrow. Not better than Herbert. He's not better than Stroud, in my opinion. Who did I put at 6? Oh, Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford fucking rules. So, and I wouldn't have given him MVP last year. Like, you look at his numbers, they were fine. They weren't bad, but I would have given it to Dak, Josh Allen, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud. I would have given it to a handful of guys before I gave it to Lamar. Unfortunately, the MVP's become who's the quarterback for the team with the most wins award. So that's annoying. There were guys who deserved it more last year, but they gave it to Lamar. So it's okay. It's fine. A lot of great quarterbacks that don't have an MVP. Drew Brees doesn't have one, which is weird. So it happens. It's all right. Yeah, I don't hate Lamar. I think he's overrated. I don't hate him. Yeah, man, calm down with that stuff. No hate toward Lamar whatsoever. I just think that he's been very overrated. That's still a top 10 quarterback without a doubt. But when it comes to the playoffs, I don't view until he has like a ginormous win, I'm not going to be afraid of the Ravens as like a legitimate Super Bowl team, you know? But that's probably where we'll wrap it for today. I'll do my mock Steelers schedule tomorrow. Apparently, that's a thing now, where we've graduated from mock drafts to mock schedules. But I kind of like mock schedules. Don't know why, but I think they're fun. So I did one at Behind the Steel Curtain, so you can go read that. But if you don't, I'll go over it tomorrow. We'll have nice little chats about it. It'll be nice. So mock schedule tomorrow. And the Post Malone Morgan Wallen song comes out at midnight. So go listen to that. I know I will. That's how I'll be spending my night once it comes out. So Steelers mock schedule will be tomorrow. So basically, I'm just predicting what their schedule will look like. We'll talk about it, and that'll be that. So appreciate everybody for watching. If you're not already subscribed, do all that YouTube stuff and subscribe. Appreciate it. Be back tomorrow with the mock schedule. It'll be fun. So appreciate you for tuning in.